My name is Melissa Gardner, and the last time my father looked me in the eye, he told me I was the biggest disappointment the Gardner family ever produced. That was 3 years ago, in a church parking lot just outside Dallas, after my grandmother's funeral. He'd just finished shaking hands and playing the role of grieving son for everyone to see, his polished shoes planted firmly on the Texas asphalt. Then he turned to me, his face stone cold beneath that old Stetson hat, and said, "You really missed your calling, Melissa. It's a shame you never figured out what it means to carry the Gardner name with pride." It's funny the moments that stay burned in your memory. The Texas sun was low in the sky, burning orange behind the power lines. The rest of the family milled around the rental cars, already talking about what restaurant they'd hit for dinner. My brother Alex was surrounded by cousins, looking every inch the all-American hero in his uniform. And I was alone, clutching my police officer's dress, hat, and wishing I could just disappear. 3 years have passed since that moment, and everything has changed. Today, I'm sitting at the front table in the main courtroom of the Dallas County District Courthouse, a building whose beige walls and harsh lights have seen decades of tears and anger and second chances. The bailiff calls the room to order, and the benches fill with officers in dress blues, city lawyers, and a handful of family members trying to avoid eye contact with me. I look over and spot my father, James Gardner, in the front row. He has no idea what's about to happen. If someone had told me back then, standing in that church parking lot, my self-worth cracked and flickering, that one day I'd be the one prosecuting my own father for federal crimes, I would have laughed in their face. But life has a way of circling back, forcing you to confront the things you tried your whole life to escape. I didn't become a cop to chase family ghosts or to win anybody's approval. At least, that's what I always told myself. The truth is messier. Being a Gardner meant something in our part of Texas. My father, Captain James Gardner, was practically a local legend. Decades in law enforcement, community events, American flags in every photo. My brother, Alex, followed in his footsteps right out of high school, Texas A&M, Police Academy, then Special Units. He was the golden boy, the hometown hero who never did anything wrong. When Alex got promoted, my dad threw a barbecue so big half the town showed up. When I made detective in New York City, they just texted, "Congratulations, I guess." I grew up in a house where the rules were clear. Men did the hard jobs. Women supported from the sidelines. Even when I was top of my class, winning debate tournaments and reading criminal code for fun, my father never quite knew what to do with me. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" he'd say after dinner, his eyes already drifting back to the TV, to the football game or whatever story Alex was telling about his latest bust. My mother would just give me that soft look from across the kitchen, the one that meant, "Don't push it." She never raised her voice, never contradicted him. It just wasn't her way. I learned early to keep my head down, do the work, and hide the parts of myself that made people uncomfortable. Sometimes I think about those endless Texas summers, the sound of my dad and Alex tossing a football out back, the heat swirling in the air. I'd sit on the porch steps, tracing the cracks in the concrete, pretending I didn't hear them talking about real police work here and a men of honor. I told myself it didn't matter, that I'd carve my own path, somewhere far away from all of them. And I did, but no matter how many years passed, or how many miles I put between me and Texas, that voice always followed me. "Why can't you be more like your brother?" It's that same voice echoing now in my mind as I stand up and adjust my badge at the prosecutor's table. The judge, an older woman with a reputation for not tolerating nonsense, takes her seat. "This court will come to order," as she says, her gaze sweeping the room. My father sits stiff as a board. his jaw tight. Alex is beside him, dressed in uniform, eyes locked on the floor. I wonder if he knows. I look down at the files in front of me. Months of investigation, boxes of evidence, witness lists, bank records, sworn statements. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent years trying to earn a seat at this table, never thinking it would be to bring my own family to justice. I take a breath. The real story, my story, is just beginning. Growing up in the Gardner household, everything revolved around reputation. My father didn't just believe in the badge, he was the badge. For as long as I could remember, there was a photo of him in uniform hanging above our fireplace, flanked by American flags, medals glinting. His jaw set the way only men who believe they're unbreakable can manage. Every family dinner turned into a lecture on duty, loyalty, and legacy. This family stands for something, he'd say, his voice echoing off the wood-paneled walls. And it's your job to make sure you don't embarrass the name. The name, always the name. At church, at the grocery store, at every town parade, people nodded to my father like he was some sort of sheriff in an old western. Captain Gardner, good to see you. Alex, you make your old man proud. But for me, the attention always turned awkward. You're Melissa, right? The other one. The one who didn't fit. Alex ate it up. He was born for the spotlight, always had a story to tell, always knew how to charm the adults. When he made captain of his high school football team, they'd bought him a Ford F-150, sparkling red, brand new off the lot. When I graduated valedictorian, first in our school's history to earn a full-ride scholarship to Columbia, my father barely looked up from his paperwork. Grades don't teach you how to handle real life, he grumbled, and changed the subject. Even as a kid, I learned that affection was something you earned in small, measured doses. Alex got the pride, the family's investment, the respect. I got the leftovers, the half-smiles, the absent-minded pats on the back, the occasional "a good for you" Mela thrown over his shoulder if I did something truly impressive. Still, I kept trying. What else could I do? After Columbia, while my classmates were chasing jobs in big law firms, I signed up for the NYPD. Everyone assumed it was a rebellion, a way to run from Texas and prove a point. But for me, it felt like the only way to prove, even to myself, that I could handle the things my father worshipped. It was tough, brutal sometimes, and I loved every second. I worked patrol in the Bronx, took double shifts, and passed every test to get into internal affairs. My badge became my armor, my way of showing I could do more than anyone ever expected. But nothing I did seemed to matter back home. Dad would still call every few weeks, always asking about Alex first, his new cases, his commendations, his life as a rising star in the Dallas PD. Then, almost as an afterthought, he'd ask about me. Still working those desk jobs? He'd joke. Somebody's got her do the paperwork, I guess. Even Mom would gently remind me not to argue, not to push too hard. Your father just wants what's best for you, honey. He's old-fashioned, that's all. The worst part was, part of me believed it. Maybe if I'd tried harder to fit the Gardner mold, things would have been easier. Maybe if I'd stayed in Texas, settled down, worn a dress instead of a uniform, things would have turned out differently. But that was never me. I was born to fight for justice, even if it meant standing alone. The real turning point came 2 years ago at Alex's promotion ceremony. I'd flown in from New York, spent 4 hours on a cramped plane, then drove straight from the airport to the police headquarters. I wore my dress blues, 3 rows of ribbons, including medals for valor that Alex would never qualify for. Dad didn't notice. Instead, he stood at the podium, chest out, describing Alex as their true Gardner legacy, a man of action, courage, and honor. I sat in the back, feeling invisible, my whole career erased in a single sentence. Afterward, while everyone else crowded around Alex, shaking his hand, clapping him on the back, I found myself lingering by the punch bowl. A cousin wandered over, someone I barely remembered from childhood. "So, Melissa, you're still in New York?" "Still. What is it you do again?" "Paperwork." She smiled in that way people do when they want to pretend they're just joking. "Must be nice to have a safe job." I smiled back, but inside, I felt something snap. The old shame returned, a bitter taste I couldn't swallow. I left the party early, making the long drive back to my hotel in silence. That night, instead of trying to sleep, I opened up my laptop and dove back into the latest internal affairs investigation. Some cases keep you up at night. This one had that feeling from the start. A simple complaint about missing equipment funds had turned into something bigger, a string of financial irregularities connecting 3 police precincts, contracts, construction deals, all tainted by bribes and kickbacks. I didn't know it then, but my father's name was at the heart of it all. The deeper I dug, the more tangled the mess became. What started as a few missing receipts soon became a labyrinth of shell companies, secret payments, and city contracts signed off in back rooms. I spent sleepless nights poring over bank statements, reading witness interviews, drawing flowcharts across my apartment walls with colored string and sticky notes. My cat, Olive, would occasionally bat at the string, looking at me like I was losing my mind. Maybe I was. Nobody in my department realized just how personal this was starting to feel. To them, it was another case, a tough one, sure, but nothing out of the ordinary for internal affairs. For me, every step closer to the truth was like pressing on an old bruise, the ache sharper because of what I was beginning to suspect. The names on the files read like a who's who of Texas law enforcement royalty. Old friends of my dad's. People I'd grown up calling uncle, even if they were just colleagues. Chiefs, captains, city council members, men whose photos hung on the walls of our family home, men who sent Christmas cards and showed up for backyard barbecues. It was a network, decades deep. As the weeks rolled on, one name started popping up more than the rest, Captain James Gardner. At first, I tried to explain it away. Maybe it was a mistake, maybe he'd signed off on something without knowing. But the more evidence I gathered, the harder it was to deny. My father's signature appeared on questionable expense reports. His voice was caught on a wiretap, talking in code with a city contractor about bonuses. There were encrypted emails, flagged by the cybercrimes unit, linking him to a slush fund that moved millions. For a while, I convinced myself someone was setting him up. My father might have been stubborn and old-fashioned, but corrupt? It didn't fit the myth I'd built around him, the myth the whole family clung to. But the truth has a way of eroding myths, slow and merciless. When the task force was formed, my supervisor called me into his office. He closed the door gently, as if he already knew what he was about to say would hurt. "Gardner, we need a lead investigator. Someone with experience, someone with the clearance to see all of it. Are you up for it?" His eyes searched mine for a moment, then softened. "I know it's complicated, given your family. If you want to step back." I shook my head. "Justice doesn't care about last names," I said. but my voice caught just a little. 6 months. That's how long I worked in the shadows, building a case so solid it could weather the media storm that would surely come. 6 months of pretending everything was normal during phone calls with my mom, while she chattered about my father's latest fishing trip or Alex's a big news. 6 months of hiding my stress from friends, waking in the night with my heart pounding, my loyalty and my conscience pulling me in opposite directions. Sometimes I'd stare at the old Gardner family photo on my desk, Dad in his pressed uniform, Alex and me in matching plaid, Mom's gentle smile holding us together. I wondered if that family ever really existed, or if we'd just played our parts so well we believed the script. Inevitably, the cracks began to show. About 3 weeks before the hearing, Alex called me out of the blue. His voice was tight, the way it always got when he was worried but didn't want to admit it. "Hey, Mel. You heard about Dad, right?" "What about him?" He hesitated, then let out a sigh. "There's this investigation. Some prosecutors going after him hard. Dad's stressed out of his mind. Keeps talking about how someone's trying to ruin his reputation. I told him it's probably nothing, but, well, you know Dad. He's thinking of getting a civilian lawyer." I kept my tone even, pretending I knew less than I did. "Maybe that's not a bad idea, Alex." He paused. He asked if you'd come down for the hearing. "You know, to show family support. He thinks it'll look good to have another uniform in the courtroom." The irony almost made me laugh. After years of treating my career as second-rate, now he wanted me there as a prop. A uniform to fill a seat, an accessory to the Gardner legacy. "I'll see what I can do," I told him. We said our goodbyes, but after I hung up, I just sat in silence, letting the weight of it all settle around me. Now, as the courtroom fills and the bailiff calls the room to order, I look across the aisle at my father and brother. They sit together, heads close, talking quietly with the family's new high-powered attorney. They don't look at me, and I don't expect them to. From the corner of my eye, I see relatives whispering, old friends craning their necks to get a look at the infamous other Gardner. I keep my face impassive, my hands folded on the prosecution table. The judge enters, a woman known for her sharp mind and her refusal to play favorites. She scans the room, making brief eye contact with me, then nods for the proceedings to begin. The moment has finally arrived. After years of being invisible, of trying and failing to live up to someone else's expectations, I'm here. Not as someone's daughter, or sister, or the other one, but as the lead investigator, the woman who uncovered the truth, even when it hurt the most. The judge's gavel came down with a crisp smack that silenced the buzz in the courtroom. This hearing will determine whether there is sufficient evidence to move forward with charges against Captain James Gardner, she announced. The words were both procedural and monumental. My father, the man who'd built his life around upholding the law, was now facing a reckoning. I stood up, the weight of my badge and the memory of every childhood slight pressing on my shoulders. The courtroom lights made my dress uniform gleam, every ribbon and pin an echo of years spent proving myself to people who never really saw me. I glanced down at the files arranged in military precision, stacks of evidence, timelines, witness statements. Every page was a battle fought twice, once for the case, once for myself. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady but full of history, the state will prove that the defendant systematically abused his position, orchestrating a network of bribery and fraud over the course of more than a decade. We will show how his actions endangered public trust and lined the pockets of his friends, at the expense of this community's safety and reputation. The words sounded distant and clinical, but inside, I could feel my chest tightening. My father didn't look up at first. Maybe he didn't recognize my voice. Maybe he just didn't want to see the daughter he'd always overlooked standing across from him as an adversary. But as I described the charges, racketeering, bribery, conspiracy, misuse of city funds, I finally heard it, a sharp, involuntary gasp from the defense table. I looked up and saw his eyes on me for the first time. Shock, then something darker, disbelief, betrayal, maybe even a glimmer of respect he'd never allowed himself before. Alex's jaw was set, his knuckles white around a pen. The new attorney, a polished Dallas man in a $1,000 suit, flipped through his notes, clearly rattled. The rest of the family stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. I kept going, outlining the web of evidence, wiretapped phone calls, encrypted messages, witness statements from contractors who'd finally decided to come clean. My voice didn't waver, even as I described the very things that had propped up my father's reputation for so long, all the awards, the glowing reviews, the Captain Gardner is a pillar of the community speeches. All built on a foundation that was crumbling now, right here in this courtroom. As I finished my opening statement, Judge Walker nodded approvingly. "Thank you, Detective Gardner. The defense may respond." The defense attorney stood, smoothing his suit as if that could erase the growing sense of dread in the room. He began with the expected lines, a distinguished service, decades of sacrifice, a lifetime spent protecting Dallas. He talked about my father's war record, his charity work, the awards on his mantle. But his voice lacked conviction. The evidence, even in its outline, was overwhelming. And behind his practiced calm, he kept glancing at me, at the uniform, at the way my nameplate glittered under the lights, at the woman who refused to blink. As the attorney spoke, I let my mind drift, just for a moment, back to my childhood. I remembered being 10, sitting on the curb with skinned knees, watching Dad show Alex how to fix a flat tire on the old pickup. I remembered him saying, "You gotta do things right the first time, son. That's how you make a name for yourself." I'd sat there quietly, invisible as ever, and wondered if there'd ever be a way for me to make a name that counted. The courtroom door creaked as another observer slipped in, a family friend, maybe a local reporter. Whispered conversations buzzed behind me, full of words like a traitor, embarrassment, and a how could she? But there was also something else, curiosity. For the first time, some of them were actually seeing me, not just as the spare gardener or the black sheep, but as the woman who was unafraid to stand her ground. When the opening arguments ended, Judge Walker called for a brief recess. My hands trembled a little as I gathered my files. Years of training had taught me how to keep my composure in the most dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared me for this, for watching my own family's world unravel, piece by piece, because of choices I'd made to honor the truth. Alex approached the prosecution table as the courtroom emptied. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red. "Melissa," he said quietly, "what the hell are you doing?" I met his gaze, letting him see the pain I'd kept buried for so long. "My job, Alex." Finally. His lips tightened. "He's our father. He's also a criminal. Those things don't cancel each other out." He looked away, shaking his head, then turned and left without another word. I watched him go, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The second half of the hearing began. Witness after witness took the stand, their testimony painting a damning portrait of the Gardner legacy, hush money paid to contractors, evidence of city funds redirected to shell companies, backroom deals that left neighborhoods underserved and cops looking the other way. My father sat motionless, his attorney scribbling notes in desperation. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me, measuring, judging, wondering if they would have had the courage to do what I was doing. When the evidence portion closed, Judge Walker looked around the silent courtroom and spoke with absolute finality. There is sufficient evidence to proceed with trial. The defendant will surrender his passport and remain under house arrest pending further proceedings. The gavel sounded again, and with it, my childhood, and the Gardner name as I'd known it, was finally over. The judge's gavel came down with a crisp smack that silenced the buzz in the courtroom. This hearing will determine whether there is sufficient evidence to move forward with charges against Captain James Gardner, she announced. The words were both procedural and monumental. My father, the man who'd built his life around upholding the law, was now facing a reckoning. I stood up, the weight of my badge and the memory of every childhood slight pressing on my shoulders. The courtroom lights made my dress uniform gleam, every ribbon and pin an echo of years spent proving myself to people who never really saw me. I glanced down at the files arranged in military precision, stacks of evidence, timelines, witness statements. Every page was a battle fought twice, once for the case, once for myself. Your Honor, I began, my voice steady but full of history. The state will prove that the defendant systematically abused his position, orchestrating a network of bribery and fraud over the course of more than a decade. We will show how his actions endangered public trust and lined the pockets of his friends, at the expense of this community's safety and reputation. The words sounded distant and clinical, but inside, I could feel my chest tightening. My father didn't look up at first. Maybe he didn't recognize my voice. Maybe he just didn't want to see the daughter he'd always overlooked standing across from him as an adversary. But as I described the charges, racketeering, bribery, conspiracy, misuse of city funds, I finally heard it, a sharp, involuntary gasp from the defense table. I looked up and saw his eyes on me for the first time. Shock, then something darker, disbelief, betrayal, maybe even a glimmer of respect he'd never allowed himself before. Alex's jaw was set, his knuckles white around a pen. The new attorney, a polished Dallas man in a $1,000 suit, flipped through his notes, clearly rattled. The rest of the family stared at me like they were seeing a ghost. I kept going, outlining the web of evidence, wiretapped phone calls, encrypted messages, witness statements from contractors who'd finally decided to come clean. My voice didn't waver, even as I described the very things that had propped up my father's reputation for so long, all the awards, the glowing reviews, the Captain Gardner is a pillar of the community speeches. All built on a foundation that was crumbling now, right here in this courtroom. As I finished my opening statement, Judge Walker nodded approvingly. Thank you, Detective Gardner. The defense may respond. The defense attorney stood, smoothing his suit as if that could erase the growing sense of dread in the room. He began with the expected lines, a distinguished service, decades of sacrifice, a lifetime spent protecting Dallas. He talked about my father's war record, his charity work, the awards on his mantle. But his voice lacked conviction. The evidence, even in its outline, was overwhelming. And behind his practiced calm, he kept glancing at me, at the uniform, at the way my nameplate glittered under the lights, at the woman who refused to blink. As the attorney spoke, I let my mind drift, just for a moment, back to my childhood. I remembered being 10, sitting on the curb with skinned knees, watching Dad show Alex how to fix a flat tire on the old pickup. I remembered him saying, You gotta do things right the first time, son. That's how you make a name for yourself. I'd sat there quietly, invisible as ever, and wondered if there'd ever be a way for me to make a name that counted. The courtroom door creaked as another observer slipped in, a family friend, maybe a local reporter. Whispered conversations buzzed behind me, full of words like a traitor, embarrassment, and a how could she? But there was also something else, curiosity. For the first time, some of them were actually seeing me, not just as the spare gardener or the black sheep, but as the woman who was unafraid to stand her ground. When the opening arguments ended, Judge Walker called for a brief recess. My hands trembled a little as I gathered my files. Years of training had taught me how to keep my composure in the most dangerous situations, but nothing had prepared me for this, for watching my own family's world unravel, piece by piece, because of choices I'd made to honor the truth. Alex approached the prosecution table as the courtroom emptied. His face was pale, eyes rimmed red. "Melissa," he said quietly, "what the hell are you doing?" I met his gaze, letting him see the pain I'd kept buried for so long. "My job, Alex." Finally. His lips tightened. "He's our father. He's also a criminal. Those things don't cancel each other out." He looked away, shaking his head, then turned and left without another word. I watched him go, feeling both lighter and heavier at the same time. The second half of the hearing began. Witness after witness took the stand, their testimony painting a damning portrait of the Gardner legacy, hush money paid to contractors, evidence of city funds redirected to shell companies, backroom deals that left neighborhoods underserved and cops looking the other way. My father sat motionless, his attorney scribbling notes in desperation. I could feel the eyes of the entire room on me, measuring, judging, wondering if they would have had the courage to do what I was doing. When the evidence portion closed, Judge Walker looked around the silent courtroom and spoke with absolute finality. There is sufficient evidence to proceed with trial. The defendant will surrender his passport and remain under house arrest pending further proceedings. The gavel sounded again, and with it, my childhood, and the Gardner name as I'd known it, was finally over. The courtroom emptied with that strange hush that always follows a bombshell. Some of my relatives looked at me with shock, others with anger, but most with a heavy mix of confusion and fear, the way people look at a fire that's out of control. My father avoided my eyes as he collected his things, surrounded by lawyers and a few old friends whose faces were already tight with calculation. My mother wasn't there. She'd stopped attending family events long ago, retreating into her own quiet world as the myth of the Gardners began to erode. As I packed my files, I became acutely aware of the distance I'd put between myself and the rest of the family. It wasn't just physical. All those years in New York, the endless shifts, the sorry, I can't make it a messages. It was something deeper, a wall built out of hurt and the stubborn refusal to pretend anymore. Now, with everything out in the open, there was no wall left. Just a raw, open wound. In the hallway, a few local reporters hovered, waiting for a quote. I brushed past them, keeping my head high, my uniform crisp, every step measured. I could feel the weight of what I'd done, not just exposing my father, but shattering an entire community's idea of what it meant to be a Gardner. In a town like Dallas, the ripples would be felt for years. Outside, the Texer's sun was merciless. I paused on the courthouse steps, squinting against the light, and allowed myself a moment of weakness. The badge on my chest felt heavier than ever. I thought about all those times I'd watched Alex and Dad tossing the football in the backyard, the unspoken lesson that you either belonged or you didn't. I had always assumed justice would feel cleaner than this, that doing the right thing would come with a kind of peace, a clarity. Instead, I just felt tired. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my supervisor. Outstanding work, Gardner. Solid case. Proud to have you on the team. I stared at the message for a moment, then slipped the phone back. Pride, recognition. I chased them my whole life, but they didn't fill the emptiness I felt now. The next few days passed in a blur. I spent my hours reviewing evidence, prepping for trial, barely eating, barely sleeping. Every time I tried to call my mom, she let it go to voicemail. Alex didn't answer at all. The only voice I heard was Dad's, echoing from years past, "A Gardners don't break. We protect our own." One afternoon, a package arrived at my apartment. No note, no return address. Inside was an old family photo, the one where we all stood on the porch, squinting into the Texas sun, Dad's hand resting awkwardly on my shoulder. I traced the faces with my finger, feeling that old ache rise up again. For a second, I wondered if it was a message from Alex, or maybe Mom, but deep down, I knew it didn't matter. That family was gone. The trial preparations grew more intense. Every witness, every piece of evidence, every legal argument, they all carried the added weight of legacy. My team worked late into the night, double-checking every detail. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood what was at stake. This wasn't just a corruption case. It was the fall of an institution. Then, late one evening, there was a knock on my door. I hesitated, heart pounding, then opened it to find Alex standing there. He looked exhausted, suit rumpled, eyes bloodshot. "Can I come in?" he asked, voice hoarse. I nodded, stepping aside. He didn't sit, just paced my tiny living room, hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I keep thinking this is all some kind of nightmare," he said finally. "Like I'll wake up and Dad'll be out on the porch, complaining about the coffee, asking where you are." I waited. Alex stopped pacing, turned to face me. "Why'd you do it, Mel? I mean, I get the lore, I get the evidence, but why you? Why'd you have to be the one?" His question stung, not because I hadn't asked it myself 1,000 times, but because I knew my answer would only hurt him more. Because no one else would, Alex. Because if I didn't, someone else would have, and they wouldn't care about the family, or the truth, or Dad's side of the story. They'd just see another dirty cop. I couldn't let that happen. I had to do it right. He slumped onto the couch, head in his hands. "You could have warned us." I sat beside him, our shoulders barely touching. "Would you have believed me?" He didn't answer, and the silence between us stretched out, thick and heavy. After a while, he stood. "You're not the only one who lost something, Mel." He left without looking back, the door clicking shut behind him. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my badge on the nightstand catching the moonlight. I thought about everything I'd lost, and everything I was fighting for. Justice wasn't supposed to feel like this, but maybe, I realized, that was the point. Sometimes the only way to build something better is to tear down what was never as strong as it seemed. And in that darkness, I understood, I hadn't just prosecuted my father. I'd finally set myself free. The trial date loomed like a thunderstorm. My days became a blur of depositions, late-night meetings with the legal team, and endless hours spent cross-referencing evidence that painted a picture I sometimes wished I could unsee. Each morning, I suited up, The crisp NYPD blue, a constant reminder of the lines I'd chosen to cross, and the lines I refused to blur. Word spread quickly through Dallas. It didn't matter that I'd spent years serving and protecting. The news stories zeroed in on the spectacle. A cop daughter brings down decorated captain. The headlines made it sound like a vendetta, like I'd come back to Texas to settle old scores. On social media, distant relatives and old neighbors aired their theories and judgments. Some called me a hero. Others called me a traitor. Every time I walked into a grocery store or stopped for gas, there were whispers. I recognized the looks, the same ones I got growing up when people saw me as the other Gardner, the black sheep, the one who didn't quite fit. But this was different. The judgment was sharper, the betrayal deeper. People saw me not just as an outsider, but as the reason their faith in the Gardner name was crumbling. The nights were the hardest. My apartment, which had always been a haven, now felt empty. My phone would light up with missed calls, some from numbers I didn't recognize, others from friends who didn't know what to say anymore. My mother sent short, clipped messages. I hope you're okay. Call when you can. I knew she was trying, in her own way, to keep the peace. But there was no peace to keep. One evening, as I reviewed documents in my tiny kitchen, a knock rattled my door. I opened it to find Jenny Marshall, a childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. She wore a determined expression, her arms full of Tupperware and casserole dishes. "You look like you could use a friend," she said, pushing past me into the living room. I smiled despite myself. "You always did know when to show up." Jenny shrugged. "I figured you hadn't eaten a real meal in a week." She surveyed the evidence folders and sticky notes covering my coffee table. "So this is what taking down a legacy looks like, here?" We ate together, mostly in silence. After a while, she said quietly, "My dad's angry at you, you know. Says you're ruining everything the Gardners built." "But me? I think you're doing what no one else ever had the guts to do." I stared at my plate, emotions warring in my chest. Sometimes I wish I'd never found any of this, Jenny. Sometimes I wish I'd just stayed in New York, kept my head down, pretended I didn't know. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "But you did know. And now none of us have to pretend anymore." It was the first time in months I let myself cry. Not because I regretted what I'd done, but because someone finally understood how hard it was, not just to fight for justice, but to be alone in that fight. Trial prep only intensified. My days filled with witness coaching and strategy sessions with the prosecution team, my nights haunted by dreams of my childhood, Dad grilling burgers in the backyard, Alex teasing me about my bookworm ways, Mom humming to herself in the kitchen. In those dreams, we were still a family, still whole. I always woke up aching. At pretrial hearings, my father's attorney tried everything to get the case thrown out. They argued entrapment, misinterpretation, claimed the investigation was a personal crusade. But the evidence spoke louder than any defense. Wire transfers, recorded conversations, shell companies registered to distant cousins. The web was too complete to unravel. Sometimes, sitting at the prosecution table, I'd catch my father watching me, his eyes hard, searching for some sign of doubt. I wondered what he saw, the stubborn little girl who used to ask too many questions, or the detective who'd finally found the answers nobody wanted. The trial date arrived, and the courthouse overflowed with reporters, police, and locals drawn by the drama. As I walked inside, a little girl tugged at her mother's hand on the courthouse steps and whispered, "Is that the cop lady?" Her mother shushed her, but the words stayed with me. For the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, what I was doing wasn't just about the Gardner family. Maybe it was about giving other daughters permission to ask hard questions, to refuse to look away. That morning, as the court came to order and the judge called me to deliver my opening arguments, I stood a little taller. For the first time, the badge on my chest felt light. The first day of trial dawned hot and bright, Texer's sun already fierce by the time I parked outside the courthouse. I adjusted my uniform in the rearview mirror, feeling the nerves clench in my stomach. This was it, the culmination of everything I'd worked for, and everything I'd tried to avoid my whole life. Today, the story of the Gardners would be rewritten, and I was the one holding the pen. Inside, the courthouse was buzzing. Reporters milled around the marble foyer, their cameras flashing as soon as they saw me approach. I kept my eyes straight ahead, reminding myself why I was here. Justice wasn't a show, even when everyone else tried to make it one. The courtroom itself felt like a pressure cooker. Rows of uniformed officers, city officials, and half the old guard of Dallas law enforcement filled the benches. I could feel their stares, some curious, some hostile, a few quietly supportive. I found my place at the prosecution table, laying out my files with careful precision. The defense attorney sat across from me, sleek and calm, flanked by two junior associates. My father, Captain James Gardner, was right beside him. For the first time, he looked small in a suit that suddenly seemed too big for his frame. The judge entered and called us to order, her voice ringing with authority. We are here to determine whether the actions of Captain James Gardner constitute a pattern of criminal behavior in violation of state and federal law. The courtroom fell silent. It was more than a trial. It was a public reckoning. As lead prosecutor, it was my turn first. I stood and began to present the state's case. I outlined the timeline, how a routine audit had uncovered missing funds, how that led to the discovery of a complex system of bribes and kickbacks, how contracts were awarded to friends in exchange for cash. I explained the pattern: shell companies set up in distant states, money funneled through false invoices. Officers who were promoted or punished not for merit but for loyalty. Every detail was meticulously documented, but it was the human cost I wanted the jury to feel. I called witnesses, officers who'd lost out on promotions, honest contractors forced out of business, neighborhood activists whose communities had been shortchanged while money flowed elsewhere. One by one, they told their stories, some nervous, some angry, a few almost tearful. In every voice, I heard echoes of the childhood I'd tried to escape, the lessons about loyalty and justice my father had once claimed to hold dear. When it was time to introduce the most damning evidence, wiretapped calls, bank statements, emails, I felt my father's eyes on me, burning with a mix of resentment and something like disbelief. For years, he dismissed my work as a paper-pushing. He had told anyone who'd listened that real police didn't waste time on internal politics. Now he saw, maybe for the first time, that justice doesn't care about reputation. Halfway through the morning, as I finished laying out the case, I paused and met his gaze. The room was silent, every eye on us. The law isn't about protecting legacies, I said quietly. It's about protecting the truth, no matter how painful that truth may be. The defense began their cross-examination, trying to poke holes in the timeline, suggesting the investigation was biased because of my family connection. They tried to rattle me with personal questions, implying this was some vendetta. I answered every question calmly, refusing to be baited. In those moments, I realized something had changed. For the first time, I wasn't the one seeking approval. I was the one setting the terms. During a recess, I stepped out into the hallway for a breath of air. Alex was waiting for me, arms crossed, jaw tight. "You're really going to do this?" he said, voice low. "Put Dad away for good?" I didn't flinch. "He did this, Alex. I'm just making sure the truth comes out. He's still our father. And I'm still your sister." But I took an oath. "So did you." He looked away, struggling to find the right words. For a moment, I saw the little boy I used to play with, before life made us adversaries. "It didn't have to be you," he said finally. "Maybe it always had to be," I replied, feeling the weight of every choice I'd made. Back inside, the trial pressed on. Witness after witness, piece after piece of evidence. I felt the eyes of my family, my colleagues, my city, measuring me, not as the other Gardner, but as the officer who dared to hold the line. By the time court adjourned that evening, I was exhausted, physically, emotionally, spiritually. But as I packed up my files and headed for the door, I caught a glimpse of myself in the glass. For the first time, I didn't see the black sheep or the family disappointment. I saw a woman standing alone, but standing tall. Tomorrow, the hardest questions would be asked. But for tonight, I let myself believe that, whatever the outcome, I had finally found my voice. The final day of testimony felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. The courthouse was packed, the air heavy with the sense that something irreversible was about to happen. I watched jurors take their seats, their faces drawn with fatigue. I wondered what they thought of the story they'd heard, not just about bribes and fraud, but about a family torn apart by its own secrets. Closing arguments began. The defense went first, painting my father as a man who had sacrificed everything for his community, who had been a court-uppie in a system larger than himself. They leaned on old photos and commendations, letters from grateful citizens, decades of a service. Their words wove nostalgia and regret, an appeal to memory and mercy. For a moment, I almost saw my father the way the city always had, invincible, above reproach. But the evidence was a shadow that no speech could outshine. When my turn came, I stood slowly, every muscle aching with the weight of what I was about to say. "I wish I could stand here and tell you this is easy," I began. "That upholding the law is simple when it's someone you love sitting at the defense table. But justice isn't about comfort. It's about truth, even when the truth costs us everything." I walked the jury through the facts again, but this time, I let myself speak from the heart. We all want to believe our families are above mistakes. We want to believe that loyalty means silence. But real loyalty, to the law, to this city, to ourselves, means having the courage to do what's right, even when it hurts. I looked directly at my father, letting the silence stretch until he finally met my eyes. I wanted him to see the daughter who had never stopped trying to earn his respect, and the officer who now knew what it meant to truly serve. After the jury retired, the tension in the room thickened. I could feel my hands shaking as I gathered my files, the echo of every word spoken in that courtroom ringing in my ears. My father's lawyer leaned in, whispering, "And no matter how this goes, you made your point." Did I? I wondered. Was justice a victory, or just a new kind of loss? Hours later, the jury returned. The foreman's voice was flat but steady as he read the verdict, guilty on all counts. There was a ripple of movement, reporters scribbling, family members gasping, the distant sob of someone I couldn't see. I stayed standing, waiting for the world to stop spinning. Judge Walker looked down at my father with a mixture of sadness and finality. Captain Gardner, this court finds you guilty of all charges. Sentencing will follow. Until then, you are remanded to custody. As the courtroom emptied, the whispers followed me like a second shadow. Traitor. Hero. Destroyer. Reformer. Each word clung to me, none of them telling the whole story. Outside, I stood alone beneath the wide Texas sky, feeling the pull of memories and regrets. My badge felt lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because I finally understood its true weight. I had spent my life chasing my father's approval, only to realize that integrity was never about being seen. It was about seeing myself, clearly, for the first time. As the sun dipped low, painting the courthouse in gold, Alex found me on the steps. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside me, shoulders slumped. "He'll never forgive you, you know," he said quietly. "Maybe not," I replied. "But I had to forgive myself." He turned, looking at me as if searching for the sister he remembered, the one who used to race him down the driveway, who still believed families could always be fixed. "What now?" he asked. I took a deep breath. "We move forward. We build something better. We make the name Gardner mean something honest, even if it's just for ourselves." Alex nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "For what it's worth, Mel, I think you did the right thing. Doesn't make it hurt less. But it's the truth." We stood together in silence, two Gardners alone in the world, the weight of legacy finally shifting into something we could choose for ourselves. That night, back in my apartment, I poured a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. My phone buzzed, a message from Jenny. "Proud of you. Call me when you're ready." For the first time in months, I let myself feel hope. The old story was over. A new one, with my name at the center, was just beginning.